I never thought my stepfather would become my biggest obstacle. I also never thought I'd have to ghost my own family just to survive. But life has a way of throwing you into impossible situations. I was 17 when everything changed. Before that, it was just me and my mom, surviving after losing my dad. He was the kind of father everyone wishes they had, brilliant, kind, and always present. He worked in cybersecurity before it became a big thing, and he taught me everything he knew. By the time I was 10, I was coding in Python. By 12, I was building scripts just for fun. He never forced it on me, never made me feel like I had to follow in his footsteps. But he always told me, knowledge is power, kid. If you can build something, you control it. Then cancer took him. Fast. No warnings, no drawn-out battle. Just a month of confusion, hospital visits, and then silence. I remember his last real conversation with me. He was weak, barely able to hold my hand, but his voice was steady. Don't let anyone steer you away from your future. And take care of your mom. I was 12. I didn't understand what he was really asking of me. For a while, it was just us. My mom and I had our routines. Friday night movie marathons, weekend hikes, Sunday breakfast where she'd make pancakes just the way Dad used to. She was an English teacher, fiercely independent, and never let her grief define her. I admired her for that. Then he came along. Tyler wasn't just some guy she met at work or through friends. No, she met him online, through some support group for single parents. I don't know what his opening line was, but it must have been good, because within months, he was having dinner at our house, acting like he'd always belonged there. He ran a used car lot. One of those sleazy, no credit, no problem places you see in shady parts of town. He wore a Rolex that was about as real as his promises, and every time he talked, it felt like he was selling something. I hated him instantly. But the real problem wasn't Tyler. It was his son, Evan. Evan was my age, but that's where our similarities ended. If I spent my time studying, coding, and pushing myself, Evan spent his scheming, partying, and failing every class he touched. He walked around like he owned the world, dripping in designer clothes his dad bought on credit, and treating everyone like extras in his personal movie. The moment he moved in, he decided I was his personal target. It started with small things. Accidentally taking my hoodie, borrowing my headphones and forgetting to return them. Blasting his music when he knew I was trying to study. But it escalated. He'd spread rumors at school about me, mock my obsession with coding, try to humiliate me in front of people who mattered. And my mom? She just kept telling me to be patient. He's had a tough life, she'd say, as if I hadn't lost my father, as if I hadn't been fighting my own battles. But the final straw came the day I got into college. It wasn't just any college. It was the college. The kind of place where getting in meant your future was set. The acceptance email came at 6:42 p.m., and I must have read it a dozen times before I believed it was real. When I told my mom, she screamed and hugged me. For the first time in years, I saw the pride in her eyes. Then Tyler walked in. I'll never forget how his expression changed. 1 second, he was smiling. The next, his jaw tightened, his eyes calculating. He looked at my mom, then at me. That's unexpected. He said it like I'd confessed to a crime. Evan just scoffed. Damn, bro, guess being a nerd pays off. Dinner that night was tense. Mom was still buzzing, but Tyler was silent, eating like he was thinking through something heavy. I should have known then. At midnight, Mom knocked on my door. We need to talk. That's when she told me. Tyler had a plan. A plan that involved me delaying college for a year. Just 1 year, she said. So he could invest my college fund into expanding the business. The money my dad left me. The money meant for my future. He says he can triple it in a year, she said, as if that made it better. As if I was supposed to believe Tyler, of all people, could pull off something like that. I looked at her, stunned. And you believe him? She hesitated. I think we should consider it. That was it. That was the moment I realized my mom wasn't going to fight for me. Not against him. So I made my decision. I left. Not in some dramatic, door-slamming way. I packed quietly. My laptop, my clothes, my dad's old hoodie, the one Evan hadn't managed to steal. By the time they woke up, I was already gone. I stayed with my best friend's family, cut off all contact, and started over. For years, I worked my way up. College wasn't easy, but I thrived. I landed a dream internship, then a full-time job, making more in a year than Tyler's whole business was worth. I never looked back. Until the day I got their message. It was my mom. I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything, but we need help. Tyler had lost everything. Evan was stuck in a dead-end job, still convinced he was a future millionaire. And my mom, my mother, was finally seeing him for what he was. I stared at the message for a long time. A part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me, the part that still remembered those Sunday pancakes, the late-night talks, the mom who wasn't blinded by Tyler, wanted to know the truth. So I replied, I'll listen, but on my terms. I met my mom at a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place that was far enough from my life now that it didn't feel like I was stepping back into my past. She looked different, tired, thinner. Her once sharp confidence dulled into something fragile. She clutched her coffee cup like it was the only thing holding her together. I didn't say anything at first. I just let her talk. Tyler was gone. Finally. Turns out, his business expansion wasn't just a failure. It was a front. The car dealership had been hemorrhaging money for years, and when the scam investments he tried to flip didn't work out, he took the rest of their savings and ran. Mom didn't even get a goodbye. Evan, unsurprisingly, wasn't doing much better. Without his dad to prop him up, his whole future millionaire act collapsed. He'd bounced between dead-end jobs, burned bridges with most of his so-called friends, and was now basically couch surfing. I should have listened to you, Mom said, her voice breaking. I should have. I held up a hand. Why are you really here, Mom? She looked down, silent. Then she pulled out a folded envelope. I have something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. I didn't reach for it at first. My instincts told me this was just another attempt to guilt me into helping her clean up the disaster she allowed to happen. But something in her face, pure exhaustion, regret, made me take it. I unfolded the paper inside. It was a life insurance policy. My stomach turned as I scanned it, my heart pounding harder with every word. It wasn't my dad's old policy, the one that had set up my college fund. This was newer, from years after he died, and Tyler's name was on it. What the hell is this? I asked, my voice dangerously low. She swallowed hard. I didn't know at first. Tyler convinced me to take out a new policy years ago. He said it was for family security. I didn't think much of it, but I found out later that She stopped, shaking. I finished the sentence for her. That he took one out on me too. The world slowed. I looked up at her, my mind racing. You knew. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to believe it. He said it was just in case something happened, that it was normal. But then, when things got bad, when he got desperate, I found out he had already started looking into cashing it out. I felt like I was going to be sick. My stepfather, the man who had tried to steal my college fund, who had driven me out of my own home, had planned to take it further. Had I stayed, had I trusted them, had I compromised, I might not have been sitting here at all. My hands shook as I placed the paper on the table. And you're only telling me this now? I was scared. Mom's voice cracked. I didn't know how to stop it. And when you left, it was over. He had no leverage anymore. Leverage? I let out a hollow laugh. You're talking about my life. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she whispered. I know I failed you, but I need you to know. I never wanted to choose him over you. I was just weak. For years, I had convinced myself that walking away had been a choice I made for my future, that my stepfather was just another obstacle I had to leave behind. I hadn't realized just how close I had been to losing everything. I stood up, folding the paper carefully before tucking it into my pocket. I don't know what you expect from me, Mom, but if you think I'm just going to pretend none of this happened, you're wrong. She nodded, silent. Then I turned and walked out. Because this wasn't just about cutting ties anymore. This was about making sure Tyler never got another chance. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, the letter from my mother on the table, the weight of it pressing down on me like an invisible force. I had spent years building my life from scratch, working my way up, proving to myself that I could succeed without them. But now, everything I thought I had left behind wasn't just resurfacing. It was dragging me into something darker. Tyler had been willing to steal from me. But this was something else entirely. I needed answers. By morning, I had made my decision. I was going to find Tyler. I wasn't stupid enough to go alone. I called the only person I trusted, Will, my best friend since high school, the guy whose family had taken me in when I walked away from my mother's house. He didn't ask questions when I told him I needed backup. He just showed up at my apartment an hour later, coffee in one hand, car keys in the other. "All right," he said, sliding into the driver's seat. "Where are we going?" "The last place I ever wanted to see again." We drove back to the town I had once called home. It hadn't changed much. The same strip malls, the same gas stations, the same rundown shopping center with a fast food place that always seemed to have a broken ice cream machine. It was a strange feeling, being back after all these years, like stepping into an old, worn-out shoe that no longer fit. But we weren't here for nostalgia. We were here for Tyler. I had done my research. After his dealership went under, he had tried and failed to start a consulting business, which, as far as I could tell, was just a front for more shady dealings. He had lost his house, burned through any remaining goodwill he had, and was now holed up in some dingy motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't hard to find him. The place reeked of desperation. The kind of motel where the neon vacancy sign buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few rusted cars and an old truck with a tarp barely holding down the junk in the bed. I spotted him before he saw me, sitting outside his room, a cigarette dangling from his fingers, his once fake confidence now just a hollow shell. He looked smaller, older. Not the smug man who had tried to take everything from me, but a man who had lost everything himself. I almost laughed at the irony. Almost. Will stayed in the car, ready if things went south. But I didn't need him for this. I walked up, and Tyler looked up from his cigarette, squinting. It took him a second to recognize me. Then, his face shifted. First shock, then a smirk. Well, if it isn't the prodigal son," he said, flicking ash to the ground. "Come to finally thank me for all my wisdom?" I didn't say anything, just pulled the folded life insurance paper from my pocket and dropped it on the table in front of him. His smirk faded. "I want answers," I said, my voice steady. "Now." He exhaled slowly, eyes flicking to the paper like it might set itself on fire. Then, he chuckled. "You really don't let things go, do you?" I stepped closer. "You took a policy out on me." He shrugged, trying to play it off. "Lots of people do that. It's just smart financial planning." I grabbed the front of his shirt and yanked him forward, my patience gone. "Cut the crap." For the first time in his life, Tyler looked scared. All right, he muttered, prying my hand off his shirt. "Look, it was just a precaution. I was in deep, okay? Owed money to people who don't like waiting. The dealership wasn't making enough. You had a trust fund just sitting there, and you were being a stubborn little—" I slammed my fist down on the table, and he flinched. "Finish that sentence," I dared him. He swallowed hard. "I was desperate," he admitted. "Thought if I couldn't get your college fund, maybe I could." He stopped himself. I took a step back, my entire body numb. Tyler had planned for more than just scamming me out of my money. If I had stayed, if I had given in, if I had trusted my mother's pleas for compromise, there was a chance I wouldn't have made it out at all. This wasn't just betrayal. This was survival. And he had lost. I let out a breath, forcing myself to calm down. My hands were shaking, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much this affected me. Instead, I straightened. "You're done." He laughed, a broken sound. "I've been done for a long time, kid." I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Hey." I glanced back. He was watching me with something almost resembling respect. "You're your father's kid, through and through." I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I just walked away. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. After the confrontation with Tyler, I needed space to think, to breathe. The truth had settled in like a slow-moving poison, and no matter how much I told myself I had won, I didn't feel victorious. I should have felt relieved. He was a wreck, living out of a motel, drowning in his own failures. But all I could think about was how close I had come to being another casualty of his desperation. That wasn't something I could ignore. So instead of heading home, I drove to the only place I thought might help me make sense of it all. My mother's house. I hadn't seen it in years. Not since the day I left. But as I pulled up to the curb, the memories flooded back. The front porch where my dad used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. The tree in the front yard where I had climbed as a kid. And the window to my old bedroom, still there. Like nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. The front door opened before I even knocked. Mom stood there, wearing one of her old sweaters, her eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't slept in days. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She stepped aside, letting me in. The house felt smaller. Or maybe I had just outgrown it. It smelled the same, like cinnamon and old books, but the warmth that had once made it home was gone. The walls felt emptier, the space colder. She led me to the kitchen, where 2 mugs of coffee were already waiting. I didn't touch mine. Instead, I slid the life insurance paper across the table. "You knew," I said. She swallowed hard. "I suspected." I let out a sharp breath. "And you still let me stay in that house? You still let me think you were choosing him over me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't in the mood for them. "I was scared, okay?" she said, voice shaking. "I was in too deep, and I didn't know how to fix it. He convinced me we needed that policy, that it was just security, in case something happened. But then," her breath hitched. "But then he started asking questions," she admitted. "Like what would happen if something did happen? How fast the payout would be? Who would receive it?" I gripped the table to keep myself from losing it. "I wanted to leave," she continued. "I almost did. But I was scared. He had people I didn't even know about at the time, watching our finances, controlling our money. If I had left, I don't know what he would have done. And when you left..." She closed her eyes. "He was furious. Not just because you were gone, but because he had lost his leverage." I clenched my jaw. "So you're telling me that if I had stayed..." She flinched. "I don't know." We sat in silence. I stared at the table, at the scratches and dents from years of use. I had studied at this table, had dinner with my dad at this table, and now I was sitting across from my mother, wondering how much of her I even recognized anymore. "Why didn't you leave when he did?" I finally asked. Her face crumpled. "Because I had nothing left. He drained our savings, took everything he could before running. I had debts in my name that I didn't even know about." She wiped at her eyes. "And because I thought," she hesitated, "I thought you hated me." I sighed, rubbing a hand down my face. "I didn't hate you, Mom. I couldn't stay. I couldn't watch you throw everything away for him." She nodded. "I know." We sat there for a long time, just 2 people trying to make sense of the wreckage left behind. Finally, she spoke again. "I want to fix things," she said softly. "I know I can't change the past, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But if there's any part of you that's still..." She faltered. I exhaled slowly. "I don't know what this is supposed to mean, Mom. I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were." She gave me a small, sad smile. "I don't either. But I'd like to try." I studied her face, searching for any sign that this was just another desperate attempt at pulling me back in. But all I saw was regret. Real, honest regret. I pushed my coffee mug aside and leaned back in my chair. "I'm not promising anything," I said. She nodded. "But I'll listen." Her eyes watered, but she smiled. "That's all I can ask for." I left my mother's house with more questions than answers. For years, I had convinced myself that she had chosen Tyler over me, that she had turned her back on me without a second thought. But the truth was messy. She had been trapped, manipulated, and scared. And while that didn't excuse everything, it complicated things in ways I hadn't expected. But none of that mattered compared to what I was about to find out next. I was almost back at my apartment when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something in my gut told me to pick up. "Hello?" Silence. Then a deep, gravelly voice. "Looks like someone's been asking the wrong questions." I froze. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Who is this? I demanded. The voice chuckled. That doesn't matter. What matters is that Tyler wasn't just some deadbeat running a bad dealership. He owed money to the wrong people. And you? You just kicked the hornet's nest. A cold wave of realization washed over me. This wasn't over. I had assumed Tyler was just another washed-up scammer, that his downfall had been his own stupidity and greed. But if what this guy was saying was true, Tyler hadn't just been in debt. He had been in deep with people who weren't the kind to let things go. And now, they thought I was involved. I pulled into a parking lot and cut the engine. I don't know what you think I did, but I haven't touched Tyler's mess. Another chuckle. Doesn't matter, kid. You went digging. That's enough. A click. The call disconnected. I sat there, staring at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. I had spent years outrunning my past, making sure Tyler and Evan never had control over my life again. But now, the past wasn't just catching up. It was dragging something far worse with it. And I had no idea how deep it went. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my phone, the weight of that call pressing down on me like a vice. I had spent years making sure Tyler and Evan were nothing more than ghosts in my past. I had fought to escape, to build something for myself, to erase any trace of them from my life. But now, their failures were bleeding into my present. And worse, someone thought I was part of it. I needed answers. There was only one person left who might have them. Evan. I never thought I'd willingly see my stepbrother again. But if Tyler had really been in deep with the wrong people, Evan had to know something. Whether he realized it or not, he might be the only link between me and whoever had just threatened me. I found him exactly where I expected, working at some vape shop off the highway, slouched behind the counter like the human embodiment of wasted potential. The bell jingled when I walked in. Evan looked up, and for a second, I saw genuine shock flicker across his face. Then he leaned back in his chair, smirking. Well, if it isn't the golden child, he drawled. Didn't think I'd ever see your ass around here again. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I walked up to the counter, dropped my phone in front of him, and played the voicemail I had recorded from the call earlier. His smirk faded. By the time the message ended, his hands were clenched on the counter. Where's Tyler? I asked. Evan shook his head. Gone. Last I heard, he took off to Florida. He was scared, man. Like, real scared. I crossed my arms. Scared of what? Evan hesitated, then sighed. You ever wonder how he kept that dumpster fire of a dealership running for so long? I didn't say anything. Evan licked his lips, glancing toward the security cameras in the store before lowering his voice. He was laundering money, he muttered. My stomach turned. Evan leaned forward. I don't know all the details, but Tyler got involved with some guys who needed a place to clean their cash. That's what the dealership really was, a front. He took a cut, kept the books looking clean, made it seem like a legit business. And it worked for a while. Until he started gambling with money that wasn't his. I exhaled slowly. And now they think I'm connected? Evan grimaced. Probably. You dug into his past, showed up at his motel. You think those guys don't have eyes everywhere? You just put a target on your back, man. I clenched my fists. This was bad. Worse than I had realized. I had been ready to put Tyler behind me for good, to close that chapter of my life. But now, I was caught in something bigger, something dangerous. And there was only one way out. I had to find Tyler before they did. I grabbed my phone and turned to leave. Hey, Evan called after me. I stopped but didn't look back. For the first time in his life, Evan sounded serious. Be careful, man. These people, they don't play. I nodded once and walked out the door. I had run from my past for years. Now, I was about to run straight into it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my apartment with a map pulled up on my laptop, searching for any trace of Tyler. If Evan was right, and for once, I had no reason to doubt him, then Tyler wasn't just some washed-up con man anymore. He was a loose end in something far more dangerous. And loose ends had a way of disappearing. I had two options. I could let it go, pretend I had never gotten that phone call, hope that the people after Tyler would realize I had nothing to do with him. But deep down, I knew that wasn't how this worked. The only way to get out was to get ahead of it. And that meant finding him first. I started making calls. It wasn't hard to track down where he might have gone. Tyler wasn't exactly creative when it came to hiding. He had always been a creature of habit, going to the same places, repeating the same scams. And when things got tough, he had one fallback: Florida. More specifically, his old buddy Carl. Carl was one of those guys who was always vaguely involved in something illegal, but never quite got caught. He had a chain of used car lots scattered across Florida, each one sketchier than the last. If Tyler was hiding anywhere, it would be with him. By morning, I had a location: a rundown auto shop just outside of Tampa. I booked the next flight. The place was exactly what I expected. Oil-stained concrete, a handful of rusted cars in the lot, a flickering neon sign that barely spelled out Carl's Auto and Sales. I pulled my rental car into the lot and stepped out. A few guys were working under a car hood, but they barely glanced at me. I walked inside. Carl was behind the counter, arguing with a customer. I waited. When the customer finally stormed out, Carl turned to me. His eyes narrowed, then widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, leaning on the counter. "Didn't think I'd see you again." I didn't waste time. "Where's Tyler?" Carl scratched his chin. "And why would I tell you that?" I pulled out my phone and hit play on the voicemail. The second Carl heard the voice on the other end, his smirk vanished. "Shit," he muttered. I crossed my arms. "Yeah, shit." Carl looked around, then motioned for me to follow him to the back office. The room smelled like stale smoke and grease. He shut the door, sat down, and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, I don't know where he is," Carl admitted. "He was here for a few days, but then he got spooked. Said someone was after him. Packed his shit and ran." "Ran where?" I pressed. Carl hesitated. I leaned forward. "Carl, if I don't find him first, he's dead. And if he's dead, I'm next." That got his attention. He exhaled sharply. "Last I heard, he was heading for the Keys. Some dive bar in Marathon. But if those guys are after him—" He shook his head. "He won't last long." "Neither would I if I didn't end this." I nodded and turned to leave. Carl called after me. "Hey, kid." I stopped. "You got your old man's backbone," he said. "But don't be stupid. Tyler ain't worth dying for." I didn't answer. Because he was right. Tyler wasn't worth saving. But saving myself? That was a different story. I had one more move left to play, and it was time to end this. I made it to the Florida Keys just after sunset. The bar Carl mentioned wasn't hard to find. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. Dimly lit, cash only, filled with the smell of cigarettes and bad decisions. And there, slumped in a booth in the far corner, was Tyler. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His once polished appearance had crumbled. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there was a nervous twitch in his jaw. He kept glancing at the door, like he was expecting someone much worse than me to walk through it. I walked straight up to his booth and sat down across from him. His eyes widened in shock, then settled into something like amusement. "Well, well," he said, swirling his drink. "Didn't expect to see you here." I didn't bother with small talk. "They're looking for you, Tyler, and they think I'm involved." He sighed, rubbing his face. "Yeah, I figured as much." I clenched my fists under the table. "Why, Tyler? Why drag me into this?" He let out a humorless chuckle. "I didn't. You did that yourself. You just had to go digging, didn't you?" I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "You stole from them, didn't you?" He nodded, slow and tired. "Laundered their money, skimmed a little off the top. Thought I was being smart about it. Turns out, they don't like it when you're too smart." I exhaled sharply. "How much?" "Enough that they won't let it slide." I leaned forward. "Then give it back." Tyler scoffed. "You think I still have it? I gambled it away years ago." He looked at me, something like regret flickering across his face. "You were always the smart one. You got out." I shook my head. "You didn't just screw yourself over, Tyler. You screwed me over too. And now, I have to clean up your mess." He laughed bitterly. "And how do you plan on doing that?" I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. "Call them," I said. "Tell them I had nothing to do with it. Tell them whatever you need to, but make sure they know I'm not part of this." Tyler hesitated. For the first time, I saw something almost human in his expression. Fear. Real, bone-deep fear. If I call them, he said slowly, they'll know where I am. I didn't break eye contact. Then maybe it's time you stop running. Tyler stared at the phone, his fingers twitching. I could see the war playing out in his head. Self-preservation versus responsibility. For once in his life, he had to make the choice that didn't just save his own skin. He swallowed hard, then picked up the phone. I watched as he made the call. His voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of fear in every word. He told them the truth. He had stolen from them, lost everything, and I had nothing to do with it. He gave them a location. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. Well, he muttered, guess this is it. I stood up. I didn't come here to save you, Tyler, I said. I came here to save myself. He gave me a half-smile. Smart kid. I turned and walked out. By the time I reached my car, I heard the unmistakable sound of tires screeching in the distance. I didn't look back. I flew home the next day. The weight that had been pressing on me for years felt lighter. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. Tyler had made his choices, and he would pay the price for them. But I was finally free. I met my mother at a coffee shop a few days later. She looked at me anxiously, like she wasn't sure if I'd even show up. I heard about Tyler, she said softly. I nodded. It's done. She swallowed hard. And you? Are you okay? For the first time in years, I actually thought about that question. And for the first time in years, I had an answer. Yeah, I said. I think I am. She let out a shaky breath. I know I don't deserve to ask this, but can we try again? Maybe not as mother and son. Not yet. But just as two people trying to figure things out. I studied her face. The guilt was still there. But so was something else. Hope. I nodded. Yeah, we can try. Her shoulders sagged in relief, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the woman she used to be. We weren't fixed. But maybe, just maybe, we weren't broken beyond repair either. A year later, I got a call from Evan. He was working at a real job now. Nothing glamorous, but it was honest work. Figured it was time to stop waiting for life to hand me something, he said. Guess you were right all along. I didn't say anything, but for the first time, I didn't hate him. Maybe we had all been ghosts of our past for too long. Maybe it was time to finally move forward.